Hello again, book lovers. The Later Roman Empire by Ammianus Marcellinus. A well-known classic of the Roman times, of which the first 13 books are missing. So we get 14 to 31, and we're following Ammianus in a personal journey as he was a part of Julian's army on different occasions, and was in fact an eyewitness to a lot of the things that he tells us about in his book. I never know what to expect when I'm attacking an old classic. They might be dry as bone. This one was entertaining for many reasons. First of all, it gives you the history. Secondly, you get some personal reflections, and you'll even get, to the best of his recollections, the speeches that the various emperors made on being given the purple, as they called it. We're also getting history through the lens of the gods and varying interpretations thereof, as this was a time when, of course, people still believed that the gods were the cause of things, in a wheel of fortune kind of way. Given that this history centres on Antioch, where Marcellinus was from, and stretches out to Gaul, and then the bulk of it takes place in the east of the Roman Empire, where the Persians were kicking up trouble, I'll leave all that history of battles and geography to the readers themselves, and here are a few of my impressions on reading this rather lengthy, as in over 400 pages, in the Penguin Classics edition, description of the events of the time. As I was parallel reading this with the Carcassonne book about the witch trials, I was struck by the parallels in matter-of-fact use of torture, or to quote Ammianus, the methods then in use, which seem to have been a constant through history up until quite modern times. This history is autobiographical in places, and in fact becomes quite personal. He speaks of things in terms of we, as in the Roman army, because he is part of the Roman army. And it's full of sieges and adventures and ambushes and narrow escapes. He has a right adventure in Amida, and a narrow escape from Amudis, where he comments, "I, being of free birth, was hardly equal to the unaccustomed effort of walking," which is a nice little insight. He also likes to speculate. He wonders why rotting corpses cause disease. And we have a few omissions in the text, one where he discourses on earthquakes, and the other one on rainbows, and I wonder why these were omitted from the text. I don't know how long they were, but the introduction was 50 pages, so maybe some space could have been made. But as a little flavour of the way he thinks, he tells us that if you think stuff falls from the sky, you are a fool, as somebody must have speculated on meteors. With all the toing and froing between the Eastern and the Western Empire, it's very useful in this edition to have the year in question at the top of every page, as it does go back and forward, as they battle their way through just about everywhere. It is stressed on more than one occasion that in the battle the soldiers don't mind dying so much as losing honour, which leads me to a little battle tip. Do not take off your helmet during a battle. That sounds like common sense, but a lot of soldiers did do that so that they could be recognised, so that they could later be rewarded. But Ammianus reminds us it's not a good idea. We get the author's views on the various emperors. He becomes quite philosophical when Constantius dies. Constantius, who he informs us never once tasted fruit, and who was very, very cruel. But as he reflects on the death of Constantius, he includes a quote from Cicero on happiness, which is the following: "Happiness is nothing but success in noble actions, in other words, the good fortune that brings worthy aims to fruition," which is one of the best definitions of happiness I've heard, because not many people talk about the good fortune element of it. So Cicero lends us a snippet of philosophy. He quotes other ancient authors to show us that he's quite well versed and erudite. And we note that in those days, he tells us that there are lots of philosophers who seem to play the part of United Nations strategists or expert witnesses who have to explain away the omens and the prophecies of the oracles. Page 269 in this edition brings us another casual quote, and killed a few women who were there. And we get quite a few things like that. It's amazing how events of such important catastrophe can be brushed over in a few words. There's a friendly fire incident just 10 pages later, which is quite gruesome, but finally they get to move on into what he describes quite nicely as a smiling countryside. And that, more or less, is what you get. The armies move through, the emperor's battles get won, sieges get lifted or not, emperors die, emperors make speeches. But near the end, Ammianus seems to relax a bit and turn into some kind of Juvenalian satirist as he takes a look at the luxuriance which is going on in Rome at the time. That's nicely done. Then you get an account of sorcery, more tortures, villains, intrigue in Rome and in Antioch in the east. And not long after, a section which complains about lawyers, which could have been written yesterday. The Goths are in this history. The maps are very useful for following the surging tides. And near the end, as the Huns come roaring in, we get a very, very long description of these seemingly semi-human creatures, who are, I quote, quite abnormally savage. From the moment of birth they make deep gashes in their children's cheeks, so that when in due course hair appears, its growth is checked by the wrinkled scars. They have squat bodies, strong limbs, thick necks, and are so prodigiously ugly and bent that they might be two-legged animals, or the figures crudely carved from stumps which are seen on the parapets of bridges. They have no use for fire or seasoned food, but live on the roots of wild plants and the half-raw flesh of any etc., etc. You get the idea. And it is striking to see the impression that the Huns had on the peoples that they invaded. They'd never seen anything quite like it before. There's a rip-roaring finale as the Romans are routed, chaos reigns, and the Goths are tricked to their deaths. A terrible piece of treachery. Or, in Ammianus's words, quote, this wise plan. And then the famous last page where he finally tells us who he is. A humble soldier from Antioch, a Greek he describes himself as, and he brings the whole thing to a satisfactory close. I liked it. Gibbon didn't, apparently, thinks his prose style is awful, but of course he would be reading him in the original. And to conclude, let me quote from very near the end of the book, where our author writes, I earnestly beg my readers, should I have any, not to demand minute details. Which is nice. My readers, should I have any. I think it was Arthur Koestler who said he would swap 10,000 readers today for 1,000 readers in 10 years' time, and he'd swap the 1,000 readers in 10 years' time for 10 readers in 100 years' time, or something like that. So by that metric, Ammianus Marcellinus must be one of the most successful authors of all time.